Hey everyone, it's Matthew. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the school counsellor, and I've been asked to put together this session to discuss how you, as parents, can support your children's mental health while they're learning from home. While I'll be speaking specifically about learning from home, a lot of these skills and strategies are generally applicable, and I encourage you to use them to support your children even when on-site learning resumes. Today, we're actually not going to be talking specifically about children, but instead, we're going to be talking about you. Yes, you. There's a common joke that therapists always ask about what happened with a person's parents to find out the root cause of a person's problems. And as much as parents may not want to hear it, there's actually a fair bit of truth to the joke. Today, we're going to be talking specifically about anxiety and how anxiety can be passed down from parent to child, and what you can do to avoid it from happening with your children. This session will be a little more personal, and I want to say in advance that I'll be using words like you and your anxiety. My intention here isn't to be calling anyone out specifically, but if you do feel called out, please consider it an opportunity for change. Witnessing a parent in a state of anxiety can have more than just a momentary impact on children. In general, children are looking to you for answers on how to solve any situation that they aren't familiar with. This is normal, and it's something we as humans have evolved to do deliberately. If your child sees you respond to something with anxiety and fear, it's instinctive for them to do the same. This helps them to avoid potentially unsafe situations, even if they don't truly understand the danger presented. As a species, this helped us to survive in times where there were very real dangers that children and parents had to face. However, as we know, in today's age, anxiety doesn't always revolve around actually dangerous situations, and it's common for humans to feel anxious around situations that aren't life-threatening. So, what ends up happening here instead is that children are bombarded with signals from their parents telling them that something is dangerous when it isn't, and it sets the bar for what is considered unsafe really low. There's a common mindset among adults that I don't remember being this anxious as children, and that might be true. However, your children being anxious may not be a reflection on their lack of resilience inherently, but rather the fact that they're good watchers and listeners. If you're anxious now as an adult, then that's what will translate into your children being anxious. They weren't alive to see you when you were children, obviously. They couldn't see and learn from you then, but they're certainly seeing and learning from you now. Whilst it can be painful to think that despite your best intentions, you can find yourself transmitting your own anxiety and stress to your children, it's important that if you do notice this happening, you don't focus on guilt. You punishing yourself is not only not productive, but I'll remind you once again that your children will be observing how you behave with your own stress, and teaching them to punish themselves because they're feeling stressed is not something you want to pass down. I also want to take a moment here to say that having anxiety is really challenging and feels awful. If you're suffering from anxiety, you know that it isn't easy to just turn it off. You can't expect yourself to be able to hide it from your children, and you shouldn't be angry or disappointed with yourself just for being anxious. That being said, if you suffer from anxiety, that doesn't make it guaranteed that you'll pass it on to your children. There are absolutely some things that you can do to stop the transmission from occurring. Talking about it this way kind of makes it feel like a particular virus that we're all very familiar with, and it's not too bad of a comparison to make. Anxiety is contagious, and once you've got it, you've got it. Some people get a mild dose, some people get it really badly, and some people have it without even realizing they've got it. But there are some protective measures you can take to make sure you don't get it. And more specifically to our conversation today, to make sure that you don't pass it on to your children. The first strategy is mindfulness. I almost guarantee that everyone has heard of mindfulness before, but few people actually know what mindfulness truly is. I think of mindfulness as a time scale, with the present in the middle and the past on one side and the future on the other. Sadness and depression tilt our scale into the past, focusing on what's already happened and lamenting over it. Anxiety tilts our scale into the future, focusing on what might happen and worrying about it. Mindfulness brings our attention back to the present, where we're neither sad over what's happened in the past, nor worried about what might happen in the future. There are dozens of good mindfulness techniques out there, and you'll be able to find some just by Googling. I have 2 specific techniques that I recommend for people to use. The first is called grounding, where we go through our 5 senses to really focus on what sensory information we have around us right now. What can you see? What can you hear? What can you feel and smell and taste? Our senses, by very nature, are in the present. You can only see what you can see right now, hear what you're hearing right now, etc. It's a very powerful technique, and it helps to manage the anxiety in the immediate. The second technique I recommend is a type of meditation called body scan. Closing your eyes and slowing your breath, bring your attention to your feet and tense your muscles there for a few seconds before letting the muscles totally relax. Once you're finished with your feet, move up to your calves, then your thighs, and so on until you reach the very top of your head. This is a more physical technique, and I've found this really helps those who have their anxiety manifest physically in their body, such as shaking legs or tightness in the chest. The other great thing about any kind of meditation, including body scan, is that there are literally thousands of available guided meditations online, and most of them are pretty good. YouTube is free and has some really awesome ones, so browse around and find one that works for you. Grounding and body scan are just 2 of many techniques that practice mindfulness. Some others include breathing techniques, acceptance tasks, attention focusing, or even simply going for a walk, which is my personal favorite and what I use. The important point for these strategies is that while it's great to use them in the moment when you're feeling anxious, it's even better if you can use them proactively. They really do work, and engaging with them regularly can stop anxious thoughts from occurring in the first place. Next, it's important to learn your triggers. Sometimes, what triggers your anxiety is going to be unavoidable, at least reasonably so. A good example here is being in lockdown. Just because it's a trigger for many people's anxiety, sadly doesn't mean that they can avoid it. What's worse for our anxiety than the triggers themselves, though, is dwelling on the trigger in our minds, or even worse still, letting ourselves spiral into validating our anxiety. It's like having a sore throat and then WebMD telling you that you have cancer, or feeling stressed out about the news and then going on social media like Facebook and spending an hour scrolling through every post you can find of people complaining about the issue. If your anxiety is significant enough that practicing mindfulness isn't enough to manage it, then some boundaries need to be set around what you will engage with when you're feeling anxious. If that isn't something that you know how to do or simply don't feel like you can do, then speaking with a counselor, psychologist, or GP is going to help. Whether it comes from your own self-management or from the support of a professional, learning to manage your own stress is going to translate into your children. Children are going to feel stress. whether we like it or not. But if you manage your stress, then chances are they've been watching and learning, and it's very likely that they will manage their stress better as well. Now let's talk about talking with your child about stress and anxiety. Whether you're speaking with them about their stress or your own stress, try to remain as calm and as neutral as possible. Be aware of your facial expressions, what words you choose, and the intensity of your emotions. Your children are paying attention to every little detail. Now, obviously, while you don't want your child to witness your anxious meltdowns or see you feeling cripplingly anxious, you don't have to constantly suppress your own emotions. It's okay, in fact, it's healthy for your children to see you feel anxious. But the important point is to then explain to them why you felt the way you did. Let me give you an example. Let's say it's the first day back at school on site and the household is running late. You're stressed out and so you lose your temper. This is a very real situation that I'd wager will happen to at least some of you watching this. An important conversation to have with your child later when you're feeling calmer would be to explain that you got angry because you were feeling anxious about being late. Then, explain that there are other ways of dealing with that situation than getting angry. Because if you don't say this, then they're likely to learn to get angry themselves when they feel anxious. Discuss some other ways of dealing with the situation, and maybe some better ways of leaving the house in the morning. Then, and most importantly, follow through with it. If you model change, your children will follow. If you show consistent anxiety and anger, your children will become, you guessed it, anxious and angry. The last point I want to make is to know when you need to disengage. Sometimes, especially if you're feeling really anxious, it's just going to be better if you're not there. Obviously, don't abandon your child, but let's say that the idea of dropping your children off in the morning fills you with dread and anxiety that you don't feel like you can control. Eventually, the goal would be to drop your children off yourself. But in the meantime, have someone else drop them off in the mornings. You don't want to show your children anxiety around drop-off. At best, they'll feel anxious going to school. At worst, they'll assume that school is dangerous, because to them, why else would you as their parent feel anxious about it? If at all possible, when you start to feel yourself being overwhelmed by your anxiety, try to step away from your children. Take some time to engage with what makes you feel calmer and then return. Explain why you had to step away and what was making you feel the way you did. If you can do this, your children will not only be less likely to inherit your anxiety, but will develop management strategies to help them manage their own. I'm going to be running these sessions every week, so be sure to check back next week for more information on managing your child's mental health during periods of learning from home. This video is recorded, but I also run non-recorded sessions live on Mondays, and I encourage you to join in for our live sessions so that you can ask any questions you might have about how best to support your child and manage their mental health. Good luck, and I'll see you next time.